I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember, bacon makes everything better.
Welcome back to the North Carolina Sports Network and a very special edition of the David Glenn Show as we're talking coaching searches in college football. Here in the 2024 fall football season, Mike Waddell along with David Glenn and the University of North Carolina on Wednesday late in the day made the announcement that Bill Belichick, the 8-time Super Bowl champion, is coming to Chapel Hill as the head coach of the Tar Heels. And DG, what are your initial thoughts on the hiring of Bill Belichick?
Well, Mike, it's great to be with you again, and quick thanks to you and the rest of our staff at the new North Carolina Sports Network, because we were able to break some of the details of this unprecedented hire, and we hope folks will continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel, visit our website, ncsportsnetwork.com, follow us on social media, because we've been able to bring our headline breaking capacity from our other platforms over these last 4 decades to what you and I and others are doing now at the North Carolina Sports Network. My initial thoughts on Bill Belichick to UNC include something I saw at ESPN, America's leading sports broadcaster and content machine. ESPN, in one of its articles, described this move as, quote, one of the most stunning and compelling moves in college football history. Now, that sounds like hyperbole. That might be called exaggeration by some, but I don't think so. Certainly the stunning part applies. This is a 72-year-old man. This is one of the greatest of all time at any level of college football. People can speculate whether Bill Belichick is going to fall on his face or make the Tar Heels relevant on the gridiron in a way that they have not been for a long time. But this is fascinating news. It is stunning news. It is a compelling move. There are a lot of questions, and we're going to get to many of those questions. But this is UNC's way of putting its chips in the middle of the table at a time where you and I have discussed often, college sports has changed more dramatically in the last 5 years and is about to change more than it changed probably in the previous 50 years combined. And UNC was at a philosophical fork in the road as a university that has a huge contingent that is always harping on the athletic academic balance. When you agree to pay Bill Belichick what the Tar Heels just agreed to pay him and his staff, and in terms of support resources and name, image, likeness money, you are approaching football more aggressively, and we're going to get into those numbers later. You're approaching the sport of football more aggressively than at any point in the 130-plus year history of UNC football. It is not mere coincidence that this hiring of Bill Belichick comes at the same time in college sports history that they're adopting essentially a semi-professional model, and we're going to get into some of those details today as well.
David, UNC has been known as a basketball school for pretty much their entire existence. What does this hire say about Carolina's approach to the sport of football, and how does this move stack up with how the Heels have approached football historically?
Well, Mike, that is a great question, and I'll start here. In the history of UNC football, there are only 4 times ever, and this hiring of Bill Belichick is one of the 4, where the Heels hired as their gridiron leader someone who had already done great things at either the top of the college football ranks or in this case in the National Football League. And I mean prior to their hiring at the University of North Carolina. Just for perspective, if you haven't been around quite as long as I know you and I have, when the Heels hired Bill Dooley, way back when we were youngsters, he was an up-and-coming assistant coach with the Georgia Bulldogs at the time. When the Heels hired Dick Crum, they hired him away from Miami, Ohio, which was a powerful program in the Mid-American Conference. When they hired Mack Brown the first time, they actually lured him away from Tulane University. When they hired Carl Torbush, that was a promoted from within hire. He had been Mack Brown's defensive coordinator on those great mid-1990s teams. when they hired John Bunting. He was a former UNC player and a longtime professional coach with a little time in the college ranks. But at the time the Heels hired him, he was an assistant coach in the National Football League. When they hired Larry Fedora, he was the head coach at Southern Miss, what we call nowadays, another group of 5 program, just like Mac Brown in Tulane, Dick Crum in Miami, Ohio. None of those moves, and some of them worked out and some of them didn't, but none of those moves was an earthquake on the college football landscape. There was nothing shocking or unconventional about promoting from within or hiring a group of 5 head coach, right, or in the Bill Dooley case, taking a chance on that up-and-coming assistant coach. And sure enough, in this 2024 search, there were figures from each of those categories in this year's search. The Heels just decided to take the proverbial road less traveled. The timing of this, by the way, is not mere coincidence. Revenue sharing is coming to college sports for the first time in history. The Big Ten and the SEC are running away from everybody else financially, and UNC wants to remain one of the most desirable programs that's not already in the SEC or the Big Ten, just in case there's a new wave of college sports where maybe there's 2 mega conferences and the Tar Heels are invited to be a member of one or both of those. The 4, by the way, the 3 prior to Bill Belichick, where Carolina has essentially broken the mold for how it has traditionally approached the sport of football. 2 of them are easy to remember for fans of today. One was Mac Brown Part 2, right? By the time he was hired the second time by Bubba Cunningham in this case, he had won the national championship with the Texas Longhorns, and that guy had a stretch of top 10 seasons with the Longhorns that was about as good as almost anyone in the history of college football. It wasn't just the Vince Young year. It was consistent success before the end of his tenure at Texas. So that was certainly Carolina, taking a bigger, more aggressive swing at the piñata, if you will, both with what they paid Mac Brown the second time and the resources that they gave him in recent years, which were a step toward what they've ended up doing here with this Bill Belichick hire, where he's going to get even more resources, and we'll talk more about that later. But besides Mac Brown Part 2 and this week's hire of Bill Belichick, there are only 2 other examples where Carolina, again, took the road less traveled and took the route that is more aggressive, more expensive, the more proven commodities. One was Butch Davis. They hired him in 2007. That was 7 years. And remember, he was with the Cleveland Browns of the NFL, Butch Davis. So that's another example. He kind of went back and forth between college and pro, unlike Bill Belichick, who's been all pro all the time. But Butch Davis was hired at Carolina 7 years after he built the Miami Hurricanes as the Canes head coach into a team that finished number 2 nationally in the year 2000 in Butch Davis's final season in Coral Gables. And then those same Canes, the team that Butch had built, won the national title the next year under Larry Coker after Butch Davis had left the Canes. But he essentially built an incredibly deep, talented national championship caliber at Miami. So that made the Heels hiring of Butch Davis in 2007, again, one of these 4 examples ever of breaking the mold, being more aggressive, going the more expensive route, the proven commodity route. Bill Belichick in 2024, Mac Brown Part 2, Butch Davis in 2007. And the only other example was before you and I and many of our viewers and listeners were born. Jim Tatum was already a national championship coach at the University of Maryland when the Tar Heels hired him in 1956. Remember, that's soon after the creation of the Atlantic Coast Conference, the early days of football starting to grow into not quite anything like it is today, but just starting to grow into a more important sport on a lot of campuses. Sadly, Jim Tatum, after being hired, again, as already a national championship coach, given what he had done with the Maryland Terrapins, he had a bunch of top 10 teams with the Terps in addition to that national title. Unfortunately, Jim Tatum died after only 3 seasons as the Tar Heels head coach. He was only 46 years old. So that was the first Tar Heel approach to this way of looking at football. Butch Davis had some good years, certainly stabilized the program, also had a scandal. Bill Belichick doesn't have to worry about his players taking money from agents or some of the other things that went wrong under Butch Davis because it is a new world in college athletics. It does make many people, as you know, cringe in the UNC community when they hear Bill Belichick talking about making UNC, quote, an NFL pipeline at the college level. You and I both know that many at Carolina have emphasized the academic athletic balance for decades. And that is one reason you saw so much pushback from some faculty members in Chapel Hill, other members of the UNC community, when Bill Belichick's name first started making the rounds in the UNC coaching search. We saw some of that back when Butch Davis was hired. Obviously, the consensus at Carolina was that this was the right time and Bill Belichick was the right coach as UNC and everybody else is entering this new semi-pro aspect of college sports. And that's the long answer to the question of how the so-called basketball school is taking an entirely different approach to football this time.
And David, if you talk to the old timers around Carolina football, they'll tell you that if Sonny Jim Tatum would have lived and not succumbed to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, that Carolina could have been a power for a long time. Bill Belichick, not known for his interest in the college coaching ranks. I have friends from my time in pro football that were incredulous that he would even consider this. Was this just an interest in Carolina, or had the veteran head coach had interest in returning to the college ranks where his father was a one-time assistant at Carolina?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Mike. And I know anytime we mention anything that has to do with sentimentality, a lot of people just roll their eyes and say it doesn't matter and it's all about money. We all know it is largely about money. And if Carolina doesn't shell out the big bucks, they're not getting Bill Belichick. But there are a couple of layers to this answer to your question. Number one, Bill Belichick is widely recognized as a student of football history. Bill was a toddler living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina in the 1950s. Now, you can roll your eyes that sentiment means anything, but Bill is really proud to be the father of football coaches, and Bill is really proud to be the son of a football coach. Bill Belichick's dad, Steve, was an assistant coach for the North Carolina Tar Heels in the mid-1950s under a coach named George Barclay. There are photos in Lee Pace's wonderful book about the history of UNC football of Bill Belichick as a toddler sitting in the stands at Kenan Stadium in the 1950s. Now, again, that's some sentimentality. Everybody can roll their eyes if they want, but that is one way that Bill can view UNC differently than he would view any number of the 60 plus, Power Four jobs that are out there. Bill has a lot of sentimentality toward the Naval Academy, where his dad, after leaving the Tar Heels, was not only an assistant coach for the midshipmen, he was an assistant coach in Annapolis, Maryland for, I think it was 3 decades. I mean, it was an incredibly long tenure for an assistant coach. And Bill, to this day, has a soft place in his heart for the Naval Academy, a lot of military things, and a whole lot of details about football history, college and pro. It was interesting to me that many of our sources at the North Carolina Sports Network mentioned that Bill Belichick overwhelmed those interviewing him on behalf of UNC with his understanding of the Tar Heel culture specifically, and of Carolina's history specifically, and of Carolina's, for example, rivalry against the Duke Blue Devils in all sports. He even made a joke during the interview process about some things that he remembers his dad saying in the 1950s about, that Duke program down the road. And I think he joked that among his first words that he learned as a child, of course, a joke, were Duke sucks. I mean, that's a funny story, right? That's a personable side of Bill Belichick that anyone who attended his Patriots press conferences over the years might not even believe exists. But he's had this media role for the past year where he's shown some more personality. Heck, at 72 years old, he has a beautiful girlfriend in her mid-20s. So he's got to have some kind of personality outside of the surly stuff that he became infamous for. But a couple more layers to that question, Mike. One of Bill Belichick's closest friends outside of football for the past 20 years or so is a guy named Dave Petramala, who for the past year and a half has been where? At the University of North Carolina as an assistant men's lacrosse coach. So Petramala was a very successful head coach at Johns Hopkins, also Syracuse, hired by Joe Bresci as an assistant coach with the Tar Heels. And Petramala and Bill Belichick, through a couple of mutual friends and acquaintances, met more than 20 years ago. Bill Belichick played lacrosse as a young athlete growing up in Annapolis, Maryland, where his dad was that assistant coach for decades. So he and Petramala had the lacrosse background in common. They have, taking notes and being students of coaching and leadership and life lessons and stuff of that sort. And Dave Petramala and Bill Belichick have both described their relationship at times as being so close that they're among the only people that they either call or text every day outside of their own sport of either lacrosse or football. So Dave Petramala, I'm sure, could answer any questions over this past year that Bill, and certainly over the past couple of months when Bill Belichick, it's not like a week ago he started thinking of the possibility of becoming the Tar Heels head coach. When Mac Brown made those weird statements after the 70-50 loss to James Madison, it both unofficially started Bubba Cunningham's search for the next coach, just in case because Mac Brown had said publicly, remember, I'm not sure I'm the guy to lead this program. When your 73-year-old coach says that and causes some of his own players to wonder if he's going to step down at midseason, that unofficially in late September, started Bubba Cunningham's wheels turning on a possible coaching search, but also at some point got Bill Belichick's wheels turning about this special place, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where his dad was an assistant coach, where one of his best friends is an assistant lacrosse coach. And oh, by the way, the last layer to your question about college football in general, don't forget that Bill Belichick left pro football in January of this year after that long, successful tenure with the New England Patriots. So he steps aside in January of 2024. What did he do for the last year besides some podcasts and media responsibilities and dating his 24 or whatever-year-old girlfriend? He spent a lot of time at the University of Washington. His son, Steve, who we'll talk about a little bit later, is the defensive coordinator for the Washington Huskies. And the Huskies, of course, were in the process of making the move to the Big Ten, tougher than the old Pac-12. And Steve not only got a prominent job with the Huskies under a guy named Jed Fish that the Belichick family has known for a long time, but he did a really good job with the Huskies with a program, of course, at the Power 4 level. Well, Dad Bill got to kind of look over Steve's shoulder. Not only can the Patriots way be implemented at the college level on the defensive side of the ball? Short answer, yes. The Huskies were much improved on that side of the ball under Steve Belichick. But he also, Dad Bill, also got to absorb just the culture of college football. There are many, many differences. Some of the skeptics of this hire ask, how is Bill Belichick going to recruit? Something you don't have to do as an NFL coach. How is Bill Belichick going to glad hand fundraisers and boosters when he does have that surly part of his personality? We don't have all the answers to those questions, but we do know Bill Belichick has those very personal connections to UNC on at least a couple levels, and he has spent much of this past calendar year absorbing the college football game, not only time with his son Steve at the University of Washington, but calling some of his old friends like a Nick Saban, now in the media, legendary coach at Alabama, absorbing everything Bill Belichick can about the nature of college football, its differences from the NFL, and whether at the age of almost 73, he was willing to take this plunge. I'm not saying there's not another school where he would have considered the job, but I am saying that there were a lot of aspects of the UNC job in particular that made it even more compelling for Bill Belichick than just some random school that might have thrown a lot of money at him. In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Okay, so we talked about the past and the most recent present. Let's talk about the future. Who is Bill Belichick going to bring to Chapel Hill to be on his staff, both the off-the-field support staff and the on-the-field coaching staff?
Yeah, the timing of our conversation today, Mike, prevents a really thorough answer to that question. I imagine there'll be headlines every 24 hours, and folks can follow us on social media and at ncsportsnetwork.com for those updates. But here's what we know at this very early stage, and really it's just today that his contract was officially approved by the UNC Board of Trustees. We know that he's bringing his son, Steve, from Washington to UNC as his defensive coordinator. We're going to get into Steve a little bit more later, but he is a central figure to this entire transaction, especially given Bill Belichick's obviously advanced age. It does look like Freddie Kitchens, one of the most popular members of Mac Brown's staff, and a guy who has a lot of experience at both the NFL level, where Bill Belichick would have gotten to know Freddie Kitchens, and also, of course, at the college level, Chapel Hill and otherwise. It looks as if, it's not official yet as we speak, but it looks as if Freddie Kitchens is going to stay with the Tar Heels. That could help with a lot with continuity, right? He's extremely popular among Carolina's current players. He would have Freddie Kitchens access to UNC's recruiting board, right? He would be a conduit to any of those guys who already signed with the Tar Heels from the high school ranks, or maybe UNC's big board when it comes to the transfer portal. That kind of continuity here in the month of December, with the transfer portal just opening this past Monday and going all the way through December 28th, what we call the early window of the transfer portal. Assuming the Freddie Kitchens thing does happen, which I think it will, that would be a nice step toward continuity, as Bill Belichick, of course, brings mostly new things to Chapel Hill. So Steve Belichick, Freddie Kitchens, and then the other guy we know for sure is a man named Michael Lombardi. He is a longtime NFL executive, has a lot of experience in talent evaluation and even video study specifically. Michael Lombardi worked with Belichick at the NFL level back when Belichick was, remember, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns for a while. And, of course, his famous tenure with the New England Patriots, Michael Lombardi was also part of that. Lombardi is going to serve as that general manager for the UNC football program. You, Mike, as a former Division I athletic director, have been a huge advocate for embracing this new world of college athletics. Stanford hired Andrew Luck in that capacity, former Cardinal quarterback, of course, NFL guy. He's the new GM of Stanford football. We don't think of GMs historically in college the way we think of them, of course, in the National Football League. But Michael Lombardi is a guy in his 60s now, but he worked with UNLV at the college level a long, long time ago. But he spent most of the 1980s, most of the 1990s, most of the 2000s in the National Football League. He is another older guy. He's in his 60s, Belichick in his 70s, but he's been known, Lombardi, as both a good evaluator of talent, but also someone with a great attention to detail, strong organizational skills, and someone that Bill Belichick has called, Michael Lombardi, quote, one of the smartest people that I've ever worked with. So it wasn't surprising to me that Lombardi was plugged into that GM role right away. We do have to wait and see whether some of those famous Bill Belichick assistant coaches over the years end up in Chapel Hill. At this stage, that part is a little bit too early to tell.
So Belichick gets a 5-year, $50 million contract. Now, where does this compensation compare to other head coaches in major college football, and especially among the 17 programs in the Atlantic Coast Conference?
Well, UNC, Mike, just made Bill Belichick one of the 10 highest paid coaches in college football and one of the 3 highest paid coaches in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Since we've had a supersized ACC, whether it was 12 or 15 or now 17, I don't think Carolina has had one of the 3 highest paid coaches in the ACC. And I'm certain it hasn't had one of the 10 highest paid coaches in college football, maybe not in the history of UNC football. Remember, at $5 million a year, Mack Brown, who was prior to this the highest paid football coach in Carolina history, at $5 million a year, just for perspective, Mack Brown was not, N-O-T, not, among the 40 highest paid coaches in college football this past season. So keep in mind, in the broader context, there are 66 programs in what we call the Power 4 conferences. So if your head coach ranks in the 40s, you are in the bottom half of the Power 4 in terms of how you're compensating your head coach in the sport of football, which at most schools makes the most money, pays all the bills, or pays most of the bills, et cetera. So Mack Brown was kind of paid below the median at the Power 4 level. And now Bill Belichick is being paid as one of the 10 highest paid coaches in America at the college level. Carolina, for the record, did improve a lot of other aspects of how it treats football during Mack Brown Part 2. They upgraded a lot of different football-related resources during Mack Brown's most recent tenure. But the Tar Heels, generally speaking, have been in catch-up mode in that regard for a long time now. Again, despite making a lot of progress these past 6 years with Mack Brown back in town. But the broader answer to your question is Kirby Smart at Georgia makes about $13 million or so a year. Dabo Swinney at Clemson makes about $11 million or so. But before you get to bonuses and stuff like that, they are the 2 highest paid coaches in college football. And guess what? They're the only 2 active head coaches who have won the national championship at the college level. So if you're paying somebody $10 million a year or more, as the Tar Heels are now paying Bill Belichick $10 million a year, as Mike said, you are aiming really, really high, and you are taking an incredibly aggressive approach to what you're paying your head coach and the resources that you're giving him even underneath that. For the record, Bill Belichick was making more than $20 million a year at the end of his tenure with the New England Patriots. So he was willing to take less than half of what he used to make as long as Carolina would provide resources beyond his $10 million a year. I mean, nobody weeps for that number, of course, but it says a lot that Carolina, for the first time, I believe, in its history, has one of the 10 highest paid coaches in all of college football. After the 2 national champions, and again, the only 2 active national champs now that Mack Brown has retired, Kirby Smart, 13 or so million, Dabo Swinney, 11 or so million. The only guys in that 8-figure range, meaning 10 million or more, Steve Sarkisian at Texas. Like Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney, his team's in the college football playoff right now. Lincoln Riley at Southern Cal is in the 10 million range. His team didn't have a good season, but Southern Cal has taken an aggressive approach to football. Ryan Day of Ohio State, he's in the playoff. He makes more than $10 million a year. Kalen DeBoer, the new guy at Alabama, not in the playoff, but Nick Saban's successor. And you knew Alabama was going to pay a competitive price for its head football coach. Mike Norvell of Florida State just had a horrible season at FSU, but prior to that, he had, remember, taken the Seminoles to that 12-0 season ACC title before they were left out of the 4-team college football playoff and got waxed by Georgia in that bowl game. Seminoles crashed back to earth this year, but FSU did make Mike Norvell a member of the $10 million a year club prior to that crash back to earth, after he did rejuvenate that program in 2023 and even in 2022. So that's Bill Belichick's neighborhood now. That's a lot of coaches whose current teams are in the college football playoff, and a couple coaches who have been at the highest level or are at a school that has taken a very aggressive approach to football for a long time. This is unprecedented. This is part of why it's one of the most stunning headlines in modern college football history and one of the most stunning headlines in UNC athletics history. 5 years, $50 million for Bill Belichick. That's not a name anyone thought would ever coach at the college level, and that is not a number that anyone thought UNC would be willing to pay in the sport of football especially.
David, my family has been going to Carolina football games for 65 years. 55 of those I've been in tow. There is no way that my father, who passed away in 2012, will be able to wrap his head. And he was a smart guy, a two-time graduate like you of UNC, both undergraduate and law school. He'd never be able to wrap his head around the fact that his beloved football program was finally taking that step forward. When you put those numbers out there, $50 million over 5 years for one guy, and the amount of money that's going to be spent that people will really never understand where that's going. They'll just see the results on the field. That's an incredible investment by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Did you ever in your wildest dreams think you'd live to see this type of investment in football?
I did not. And, you know, I've talked to a lot of UNC folks, obviously, as we were trying to break various aspects of this story over the last week or so. And one of the guys who's been around for several of the folks who have been around for a really long time say that they perceived a dichotomy in the UNC fan base. Obviously, every individual person is unique and he or she can have his or her own opinion. But generally speaking, those, let's say I'm in my 50s, those my age or older can't comprehend what is happening in Chapel Hill right now. And many of the older folks are either skeptical of this more aggressive and expensive approach to football, or are concerned that it is going to do more damage to that athletic academic balance that many of them are proud of, are part of the Chapel Hill tradition over many, many decades. Those same folks who have been around UNC longer than I say that there's kind of a cutoff, and below a certain age, the attitude is more excitement about Bill Belichick. Why not, if you're trying to compete against these schools that are paying their coaches $10 million, why not push all your chips into the middle of the table? If college sports is evolving to this semi-professional world, which it is, many of the younger folks are saying, well, either get in the game or get out, right? It's no fun to pretend you're in the game and be irrelevant. Remember, Carolina hasn't won an ACC, put aside national championship, right? They got a bunch of those in men's basketball. They got even more of those in women's soccer and some other sports. They don't have any in football, and they don't have even a single ACC football title since 1980. That's a long, long time ago. We're coming up on a half century since Carolina even won a conference title on the gridiron. So again, this is a broad brush description. Everybody is unique. There can be younger people who feel this way and older people who feel the opposite way. But generally speaking, the younger folks are excited about Bill Belichick. They're excited about spending more money. They're excited about just taking that more aggressive whack at the piñata. Why be in the game if you're going to tie your coach's hand behind his back with his resources toward football? And Carolina has not been in the upper echelon in how it's treated football financially and otherwise. And the results on the field have been mostly mediocre. Since 1982, Carolina has had 7 top 25 finishes in football. Put aside the no ACC title since 1980. Only 7 top 25 finishes in football in what is that? More than 40 years now. 6 of those 7, by the way, were either Mac Brown Part 1 5 times, Mac Brown Part 2 1 time he finished in the national top 25, and then Larry Fedora had another really good season where the Heels won 11 games and played in the ACC title game. So no, I did not see this coming. I do believe that the younger people are right in the sense, Mike, that if you're going to be in this game, you got to really be in. I mean, if you we're not only nearing, we are at the threshold where this is going to be semi-professional football. And the House NCAA lawsuit is going to allow, if it's approved by a judge, it's going to allow, starting in 2025, up to $20 or so million, not coming from third party, Bob's Tractors wants to pay the quarterback or the point guard. That's third party outside the university money in name, image, likeness compensation. Starting in 2025, there can be 20 million plus, again, if this is approved, this new world, if it's approved by the courts, 20 million plus from within the UNC athletic department. Given that the teams you're trying to beat are going to be spending that 20 million plus and also compensating their coaches and creating large budgets for football. You can't expect consistent success if you have middling or below average investments in such things. I've said for a long time, Bubba Cunningham deserves praise because he's been handed a top 40 budget for the last decade, top 40 compared to all the other FBS schools. And he's produced in multi-sports, Directors Cup, et cetera, top 10 results with that top 40 budget. I think it's going to be fun. Again, there's no guarantee how this Bill Belichick experiment works out, but it's fun. It's deserved. And I side more with the younger people that this is an exciting hire. It's a compelling hire. Again, no guarantees. I'm not betting $1 million that the Bill Belichick experiment becomes an enormous success. But I fall in with the young people when they say, why be in the game if you're not giving your coaches, your players, the kind of resources that they're giving the coaches and players at those schools that you're trying to compete against?
You and I both love classic rock. We're kids of the 70s, and there's an old Who song that says, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Carolina went from the oldest coach in FBS football in Mack Brown at 73 years old to go to the oldest coach in FBS football, Bill Belichick, at 72 years old. He'll be 73 when the Tar Heels take on the Horned Frogs of TCU in the Forest coming up this fall in the season opener for 2025. Was that in any way on the minds of the Carolina hiring folks when they went into this process?
Absolutely, positively, no doubt about it, yes. On the short list of concerns about Bill Belichick, one is all of his experiences at the pro level. How's that going to translate to the college level? And one is, as you said, he'll be 73 years old by the time he coaches his first game for the Tar Heels. And that gets back to what I mentioned earlier and kind of foreshadowed with Steve Belichick, Bill's son. The bottom line here is that the wisdom or not of this decision on Bill Belichick, in my opinion, depends a lot and will depend a lot on what everyone thinks of Steve Belichick. Steve Belichick will be 38 years old this coming March. He just finished a very successful first season as the defensive coordinator of the Washington Huskies, now in the Big Ten, remember, who improved in pretty much every important statistical category on the defensive side of the ball from the year before, even though the Huskies made the jump from the Pac-12 to the much more challenging Big Ten conference here in 2024. Prior to that, for those who don't know, soon-to-be 38-year-old Steve Belichick spent more than a decade on his dad Bill's staff with the New England Patriots. Steve was a part of 3 of the 6 Super Bowl championships that Bill Belichick won as the head coach of the Patriots. And over his past 4 years with the Patriots and his 1 year with the Huskies, Steve Belichick was the defensive play caller for the Patriots at the NFL level and the Huskies at the college level. So, of course, he's coming to Chapel Hill. One of Bill Belichick's earliest demands was that Steve would be hired as the Carolina defensive coordinator and that there would be something in place that Steve Belichick would be a head coach in waiting. Now, we don't have access to the contract yet. Because UNC is a public university, we will eventually see that contract. But Steve Belichick, I practiced contract law specifically for almost 20 years. There are a lot of ways to put into black and white, to put into legalese the coach in waiting concept. It's not like it doesn't happen often enough that there's just some template and you just cut and paste. Yeah, this is how we handle coach in waiting. It's not that simple. The coach in waiting concept has been discussed many, many times. As you and I have this conversation, we are not. All we know is that it was important to Bill Belichick that Steve Belichick be viewed as a head coach in waiting. And since Bill is going to be 73 next year, whether he coached 3 years of that 5-year deal, all 5 years of that 5-year deal, which is which is foreseeable. The guy's in pretty good health and dating a 24-year-old woman. I could see him coaching 5 years until he's 77 years old. Whether it is 3, 5, 8, whatever, Steve Belichick as coach in waiting, to me, is central to the long-term success or not of this Carolina venture into big-time college football. Remember, it often goes awry. I do think because it's father-son here, it'll be less delicate than, say, the famous Florida State experiment, where Jimbo Fisher was this up-and-coming assistant coach. Bobby Bowden was the aging legend Hall of Famer. And at Florida State, Jimbo Fisher essentially was the head coach in waiting. That got delicate because Jimbo was getting itchy about wanting to become a head coach. He was considering leaving Florida State. Bobby Bowden didn't win quite as much at the end. And in the end, Bobby and his wife complained that he got unfairly pushed out earlier than promised, and Jimbo Fisher gets the promotion. I mean, that was delicate. It was messy. It was awkward. Jimbo was accused of backstabbing and all that stuff. Given here that it's father-son and that it's Bill's wish that Steve Belichick be his successor in Chapel Hill, I don't think you'll have any of those backstabbing or chemistry type problems that you had at Florida State and in some of these other coach in waiting scenarios. But that is a huge part of how Carolina skeptics got over the hurdle of why do you hire a guy who's about to be 73? Well, at least it makes more sense philosophically if you have not only this 5-year plan with the 5-year contract Bill Belichick has signed, but really a much longer plan where you can tell recruits and their families and high school coaches and transfer portal players, hey, Bill's going to be your coach for the foreseeable future, but there's already a plan in place for whenever he retires at 75 or 77 years old or whatever. So you have the certainty that you usually want to see if you're signing on the dotted line with a national letter of intent. We'll see how it goes from here, and we'll see what the contract says about Steve Belichick as a coach in waiting. We don't know those details again for now, but that's the concept that got some of the original skeptics toward Bill Belichick over the hurdle because there was this longer-term succession plan in place.
The other thing that I'm really curious about as a former person who put these types of contracts together is looking at whatever the buyout clause is in the event that Belichick would be enticed to go back to the NFL. That'll be something that we look forward to reviewing down the line. When you look at coaches that have gone from the pros to college, a lot of folks have been fumbling around saying, wow, we don't really know how many of those have done a good job. Well, I can think of two right off the bat, and Lane Kiffin, who is the youngest head coach in NFL history with the Raiders when Al Davis made him the head coach of the Silver and Black. That didn't end too well. And then, of course, Pete Carroll was a collegiate head coach at Southern Cal and also a head coach in the National Football League. Has there ever been a Super Bowl winning head coach from the NFL come to the collegiate ranks and take over a program?
There's only one example of that, and your points are well taken because we could make a longer list of those who, let's say, bounced between college football and the NFL, right? Nick Saban of Alabama and the Miami Dolphins had plenty of success, extraordinary, unprecedented success at the college level, and some for a briefer period at the pro level. Jim Harbaugh, remember, was a college coach, but then he did well with the San Francisco 49ers. Then he went back to college. He won a national title with the Michigan Wolverines, and now he's back in the NFL, and he has been successful at both levels. There's a fairly, Lane Kiffin's doing very well at Ole Miss right now after not doing well at the pro level. Your old buddy Steve Spurrier, one of the greatest Duke football coaches of all time, legendary coach at his alma mater, the Florida Gators, and had success, maybe not as much with Washington in the NFL, but was successful, in a couple of other professional football leagues, in addition to his tremendous success as a college football coach. The only specific answer to your specific question is Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh was a 3-time Super Bowl champion with the San Francisco 49ers, and he was a 61-year-old former NFL coach when Stanford hired him at the college level back in the early 1990s, around the same time that Bill Walsh was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So Stanford got the buzz that, Carolina's getting right now with Bill Belichick. Belichick, a 6-time Super Bowl champion, but Belichick also 72 years old, rather than Bill Walsh, 3-time Super Bowl champion, 61 years old. Walsh had a great first season at Stanford. And actually, way back before his pro days, Bill Walsh had been the Stanford head coach very briefly. A lot of people forget that, before he was the famous NFL head coach. But that was so long ago that he had been detached from the college game when Stanford hired him in the 1990s as that former 49ers 3-time Super Bowl champion. So Walsh gets hired at Stanford. First year, he goes 10-3, and the Cardinal is ranked in the national top 10. One of the better seasons in Stanford football history, year one of Bill Walsh in the early 90s. Then he had 2 straight losing seasons, and he ends up retiring, Bill Walsh, at 63 years old. He said he retired in large part because he could not see himself promising high school recruits at the time that he would be their coach for the next 4 seasons. He stopped believing that he had 4 or 5 more years in him. He didn't want to be disingenuous with recruits and high school coaches and the recruits' families, etc. Stanford's athletic director at the time said that the university, Stanford, got exactly what it wanted in hiring Bill Walsh, even though his second and third years did not go as well. Stanford actually was very good offensively all 3 years. They just weren't very good on defense the second and third year, and the records sagged as a result. But the Stanford AD at the time said, we got the buzz. We got the recruiting attention. We got massive media exposure worth mega millions of dollars. Our teams, it was documented at the time, just got infinitely higher TV ratings because people were curious about Stanford football under Bill Walsh in a way that they had not been curious. Recruiting attention was sky high for Stanford for a while. Again, in that case, it didn't work out because Bill Walsh said he lost the energy that is required of a college football coach. In the NFL, you do get a break. I mean, you are grinding for however many months when you count the draft and the season and the postseason. But you do get a break. College football, you don't really get a break. I mean, you get a vacation with your family occasionally, but it's darn close to 12 months a year, 365 days a year. And Bill Walsh in his mid-60s didn't have that fire anymore. We'll see if Bill Belichick does. But Bill Walsh is that only example of the multi-time Super Bowl champion who is asked to lead a college program. Again, it was mixed success. Great first year, buzz on the recruiting trail, quality recruits, fun, prolific offense, but it just didn't work out in years 2 and 3. And then Bill Walsh pulled the plug on the rest of the experiment. The only other thing I'll add quickly is Herm Edwards, remember, did take 4 NFL teams to the NFL playoffs with the Jets and the Chiefs. At Arizona State, he made a lot of promises about kind of an NFL pipeline and an NFL mindset. The Sun Devils actually won a lot of games. They had 4 straight solid but unspectacular seasons. They were all, 500 or better, so you can't say he face planted. But he also got the Sun Devils in trouble with the NCAA. Now, that was a few years ago before these rules are changing. So, you don't have as many rules to follow in this new semi-professional world of college football. But Herm Edwards was fired at Arizona State in part because of the rules violations and the scandal stuff just a few games into his 2022 season. So the Herm Edwards story is a recent example of something that had good and bad. The Bill Walsh story is the classic example of mixed results when it comes to this context for this just stunning Bill Belichick hire at UNC. If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by three actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up. The Original Salt Works has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets, or special recipe grits for breakfast, or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The Original Salt Works, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
David, you know me. I like to play what if. What if Bill Belichick and Carolina couldn't have come to terms? Where were the Tar Heels looking? Because there are a lot of rumors floating around, including some that we've talked about here at the North Carolina Sports Network on our social media accounts at the NC Sports Net.
Some of this we'll never know with certainty. We do know that John Sumrall of Tulane withdrew from consideration. We do know that Matt Campbell of Iowa State withdrew from consideration. But in terms of if things had fallen apart at the end with Bill Belichick, some names we know for sure: Jeff Monken of Army, who has led the Black Knights to one of their best seasons in modern history. He has that Army-Navy game coming up, so it was complicated for the Tar Heels to try to talk to him. Ask anyone ever associated with Army or Navy football if you can be distracted, if you'll allow anyone to distract you for any reason the week leading into the Army-Navy game. The answer is no.
Never. Go Army.
Right? So Jeff Monken was sort of on the back burner, had agreed to talk to the Tar Heels, but those conversations could not have taken place in any detail until after the Army-Navy game, which, for those who don't know, is this coming weekend. So, many days after the official Bill Belichick hire, as it turned out. The defensive coordinator at Georgia, Glenn Schumann, was a serious candidate. The Tar Heels talked to him multiple times. He would have been that up-and-coming assistant that was the most prominent among the Tar Heels candidates. And then the other guy we know was in it to the end, and many believe that Bubba Cunningham, a former Notre Dame guy, remember, a lot of people believe this would have been the next name on Bubba Cunningham's list. We'll see if he ever shares that information. ADs tend to not share that what-if type stuff. They want to focus on the guy who got the job for obvious reasons. But Tommy Rees is not only a former Notre Dame quarterback, he was a longtime Fighting Irish assistant coach, I think including some overlapping time when Bubba Cunningham was employed at South Bend at Notre Dame. So we got to know Tommy Rees personally. Tommy Rees was also the offensive coordinator at Alabama last year under Nick Saban. And Nick Saban had called UNC officials to advocate for Tommy Rees. Now, Nick's also a friend of Bill Belichick, so he knew what the competition included. But Tommy Rees, who, by the way, is currently the tight ends coach for the Cleveland Browns, everybody agrees that Tommy Rees is going to be a head coach someday. Maybe at the college level, maybe at the pro level. He's still a relatively young guy. I remember him as Notre Dame's quarterback. I actually remember him less as a coach, but he's been working his way up the ladder. Obviously, if Nick Saban hires you as the offensive coordinator of the Alabama Crimson Tide, you have some credentials on your resume. But those were some of the names still involved at the end after a handful of other possible candidates had withdrawn from consideration a little bit earlier in the process, as the Tar Heels, spent more than a week in serious conversations with Bill Belichick, but while also visiting with several other candidates multiple times each.
North Carolina hires Bill Belichick. You just heard it from David Glenn. All the details. Follow us on the North Carolina Sports Network at the NC Sportsnet on social media and online at our official website, ncsportsnetwork.com.